our next speaker, Dan Veal. He is a principal investigator at Exotopic, and Dan will tell us more about space ecosystem and how UK is building them. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. Really good to see everyone. Let me share my screen. There we go. So I spoke at the last webinar, and so I'm doing something a little bit different this time. I want to give some kind of quite personal reflections about some of the things I've been doing in the UK, some of the things that I think work fairly well in the UK space ecosystem, in the context that clearly the Middle East is really interested in building an ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I mean a really well-constructed, kind of connected set of companies, stakeholders, general public, all the sort of things that you need, the support services, all the way from, financials to legals and all that kind of stuff, to really have something that's thriving, that's got, strong, let's say, call it legs to it. And that is kind of embedded in industry. So I think the UK has done a pretty good job of that, and it's obviously developing picture. And I think there's some lessons to be learned that can be applied in the Middle East. So that's what I'd like to go through today. Very quickly at the beginning, so Exotopic, that's who I work for. Just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. So we are a small business, an SME, and we work quite closely with a lot of primes. So we've done work with Deloitte previously. We work a lot of SMEs in the UK, and I'll explain some of the things that we do. So a whole mix of investment advice, business development, insight, specialist training. We work on technical projects. We have a few spin-outs of ourselves. So we do quite a lot of different things. And therefore, we kind of gain quite an interesting perspective about the different ways that you can work in space. I had this slide last time, but I like it, so I'll put it out I think it's good to know who you're talking to or who's talking at you. So I grew up in Italy and the US, so quite an international background. I ended up studying in a number of countries. I kind of used that as an excuse to travel. So I was in Germany for a bit, Sweden, France. Had a really enjoyable time at university and got some good degrees out of it. And eventually spent quite a big chunk of my career here in the UK at a place called the National Physical Laboratory, where I built a ground-based test instrumentation for the European Space Agency, some of which is now sitting in some of their test development labs there. So that's kind of my background, but I've kind of slowly, as my career's developed, I've worked more into kind of the business side. So I do quite a lot of kind of the business development now and business engagement, and not so much the technical part. But I kind of have I think, a pretty good background to be able to kind of comment on a number of things. So quickly on the UK. So this is like a common map you see here in the UK, which is effectively showing all the regional clusters the UK has. It's kind of one easy picture to show that the UK has a relatively well-developed and established space industry. Some of the characteristics, again, with the kind of the Gulf and what's developing the Gulf in mind, I would say that it's quite regionally diverse within the UK. The UK has, 4 countries. It has areas, like London, which are kind of the financial hub. It has other areas that are a bit less developed and struggle to get industry and jobs and that sort of thing. The UK does a really good job of spreading out its space industry. It's relatively well staffed, I would say. We have really good, set of universities. Obviously, we have the same problems everyone else in the world does in terms of, keeping graduates and training enough graduates. But it's actually, relatively well staffed in the grand scheme of things. I'd say it's quite startup friendly, really good support from UK government, some quite, a lot of engagement with trade bodies and that sort of thing. And lastly, I would say the UK is getting good. It's not there yet, but it's getting pretty good at explaining the benefits of space to non-space markets and non-space customers. So this is kind of what the UK looks like. So I say, how did it get to this point, and what are some of the things that, again, might be lessons for the Middle East as it develops in its own way? So this is just a view I have. So I think there are 4, these are not the only 4 things, but I think 4 things need to work together to create a good ecosystem in a sector like space. So you need government and prime. So, primes who are active, established, and sort of take a lot of the risk in the market. Government who is supportive of a sector and sees it as important. You then have SMEs, like in the UK. I think the figures are something like 70% of all employees in the UK work for SMEs. They're incredibly important. You then have startups, which is, obviously a category of SME, but quite a different beast because of the kind of high growth, high aspirations. And then lastly, I chose investment, and I'll get to that at the end because I think it's really important for mostly kind of for the startups and SMEs, but they need investment. And they need engagement with the investment kind of community that kind of drives them to developing things that people want rather than just developing technology. So I'm going to talk a few of these things based on some of the work that I do. So I've been working on a program called the Accelerator, run by by us together with another company called Entrepreneurial Spark. Deloitte is one of the partners on there as well. So this is a program hosted effectively by the UK Space Agency. So my role in the program is enablement, coaching. I do industry connections, provide advice and financing, access to investors, and kind of a host of things. I work quite closely, and I did look on the list. So I think shout out to Barry at AS23 and Ashraf at Astron Structures, who are alums of the program that I see on the invite list. And we will do things like an example here, which was just last week. So we had 10 companies that pitched in front of investors. We brought about 10 investors in a whole day. So we did elements of training. We gave them opportunities to pitch. And so that I was the sort of the MC for the event, really kind of bringing together these investment and startup communities in one place, and then really giving good feedback to the companies as well. So rather than just kind of, a lot of companies have to kind of throw their pitches at investors, and often they just get a no or a yes or whatever it might be. And so this is a really good chance. So it kind of just gives you a bit of a flavor for the sort of things that the program does, and the things I've been involved with that really kind of get the sector involved and interested and excited. Another thing we do is industry visits. So Airbus has been a really good partner for us. So they've hosted two tours now where we'll bring about 15 companies there. Really good way to get engagement between really early startups that might never, in the normal course of business, get a chance to really engage with a really large prime like Airbus, and it kind of puts them together. So some really interesting, positive things that happen on the program that I've been involved with. One of the other things that I personally do in the kind of startup world, and again, this is just insanely important. And, I think Space Tech and Golf is a really good platform for this. It's just tons of networking. So there's a picture. It was an end of year event hosted by UK Space, which is a big trade, kind of the biggest space trade body in the UK. On the left-hand side was a talk I gave at the UK Space Conference last year on the Accelerator, actually. And so, this is just so important. I think, where I'm really happy to be, part of the kind of sponsoring this webinar is that I think just these forums where people can talk to each other in a bit more of an informal setting, put across what's on offer, what people are able to do, I think is really good. And it's really, really important to kind of build this ecosystem. Last one, I just showed a picture on there. Last time I was in the Middle East was in February, the World Defense Show, really interesting. Again, a picture I took myself of some interesting camels while I was on the bus on the way there, a bit north of Riyadh. So I think clearly one of the barriers I would say, especially to the people outside the golf getting to the golf, is having the right sort of event, the right sort of infrastructure that can host there, and the right kind of easy back and forth that happens. And I think over the last couple of years, there've been a lot more events, and I think it's really positive. But definitely, geography and culture is a challenge, but I think it's something that's definitely improving. Again, I think this is a good kind of webinar series to work on that kind of thing. Another aspect I'll really quickly cover, which is one I've been really interested in working in, is in a key part of the ecosystem is what I call space knowledgeable investors. So a lot of investors in the UK, a lot of angel networks, a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of sort of other types of company who do investment. Clearly, the Middle East, that's one of the big strengths you have. You have a lot of capital, a lot of desire to deploy it in new industries, and therefore I think this is a really important element that I think really needs some I think attention. I think it's an opportunity for a lot of companies. So the program that we helped run on behalf of the agency, so we have a couple different ones. We've been involved in Fusion, which is led by Entrepreneurial Spark, where so I ran some of these investor lounges. So I would talk about space for half an hour to investors, and they would ask questions and have a bit of a dialogue. We sort of set up various training programs for investors. We take them on the left-hand side. You see a visit we did to Surrey Satellite in the UK. And so this was really a way for space people to really kind of unlock the what's behind the space sector for investors who might be familiar with something like deep tech, or they might be familiar with biotech, but maybe aren't quite as familiar with the actual space sector and some of the weird things that happen in both the UK and globally. So again, I think this is, to meet my mind, something that's probably really lacking in the Middle East, and I think is a really big opportunity for kind of all of us collectively to try to get more involved and help. I would say, obviously, from a business perspective, I would love to help the Middle East deploy capital in space, but I think genuinely really like helping people to who have funds and want to deploy them to really understand what they're getting into, what the opportunities are, especially as the sector grows in the Middle East. Here's an example of some of the things we did. We set up a whole curriculum. We had an online website that we set up, which was a whole online course that investors go through on the topics on the screen and really kind of give them a really basic grounding about the different aspects of investment. Lastly, this is the last one, and then I'll look at a couple lessons to tidy up. So one of the other things that we do quite a lot is just general support of small, medium enterprises, SMEs. So Exotopic runs the UK Ambassador Program for ESA. So we basically manage the program. There are 4 UK ambassadors. So that gets us quite involved in helping companies for ESA funding. Obviously, being in the UK, ESA is a really big influence in kind of the space sector. It's a big funder, and a lot of the UK Space Agency contribution goes to ESA and then comes back to the US. We were involved in other things like a recent program, Aqua Lunar Challenge, which is a UK-Canada sort of joint challenge. And then lastly, we run something called the Technical Expert Support Program on behalf of the Satellite Applications Catapult. Again, this is us together with a couple of partners, including Bryce Tech, where companies can come, they can access free support up to, I think it's 5 or 10 days, and they can just say, I don't understand a market thing. I've got this company, and I'd like to know this about Earth observation. They can get some free support, and it allows them to access expertise, allows them to access different sort of things. So I would say these sort of programs are things that really help the UK space industry. It makes a really low barrier to entry because a lot of them are free. So a lot of the support, whether it's ESA or some of the satellite applications catapult, that's provided by government, run through companies like us. And it makes it, really easy to access. It kind of decreases that barrier. And I think it's really, really important if you want to build an ecosystem to get small companies help and advice, that is no barriers if humanly possible. And so there's some element, I think, of subsidy, especially when you're early on, that is probably needed. So that was sort of a bit of a sweeping tour of some of the things I'm involved with that I think are relevant, that work well in the UK, that are interesting initiatives. So kind of a few lessons here. Some of these are aimed at startups, but I think they can factor anywhere. So a few points. So primes and large SMEs, really important to seed the markets. And by seed, I mean definitely a lot of the entrepreneurs that we get going through and work with have come from primes. This is really common in the US, the huge number of companies that have started because you have ex-SpaceX employees who will go and start their own thing. I think that's really important. So until you get this established market of primes and large SMEs in the Middle East, who can then have graduates who come in, get trained up, they really know what they're doing, they deliver, they work, worldwide, and then they decide, you know what, I want to quit my job at this big prime. It's fun, but I want to go and start my own company. That's really important. And I think until you get to that point, as kind of a Gulf region, you will always struggle, with pulling people in. There's always going to be this, kind of onboarding issue with trying to get, large companies from, Europe or from the US to kind of come and play in the market. Another one is, need examples. That's a similar point, but, startups, it's quite a scary thing. That's my other point. You need to look at people who've done it and understand how they did it and try to, copy that, make it your own. Also just, lowering the barrier. So things I talked about the networking, the openness, collaboration. I think any kind of program that does that, and, especially using experience from, some of the people on this call, really, really important. And then lastly, it's just so important to do knowledge transfer. So a lot of the stuff we do is helping government understand space. We help investors understand space. Really, really important. I know it's a bit cliche, especially knowledge transfer as a term, but it's just incredibly useful and is perhaps underappreciated in terms of, again, building up the space sector and having kind of a fluency between the investors, between the companies, between government, and all these sort of things. So obviously, if any of this is interesting, very happy to chat through with anyone what we've done in the UK. We're quite keen. I didn't really mention this talk, but we were doing work in the Middle East at the moment. We're looking to expand there. So it's for us as an SME, it's a really interesting market to kind of take the things we do in the UK and do them in the Middle East and see how we can make it work and be part of that ecosystem. So with that, I will start my talk, and thank you to Alex for allowing me to co-host together with Deloitte, and I'll bring it back to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much.